Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our Q4 2022 global Bitcoin mining data review. We're delighted to have you with us today. I'm Michael Saylor. I'm the chairman of MicroStrategy. Our agenda today will be straightforward. First, Ben will review the Q4 survey results and the BMC advisory model for the entire Bitcoin network. And following that review, we'll have a Q&A session, and we'll address a bunch of commonly asked questions about Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining that have been popping up over the past few months. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Ben Gagnon. Ben, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Michael. My name is Ben Gagnon. I'm Chief Mining Officer at Bitfarms. Happy to be giving this presentation on behalf of the Bitcoin Mining Council today. The Bitcoin Mining Council is made up of 53 different Bitcoin mining companies representing just shy of half of the global Bitcoin network around the world. We have representatives from just about every far-flung corner of the world, and here are their logos here on screen. Next. To go over the quick executive summary for Q4 2022, the Bitcoin mining network is really using just an inconsequential amount of the global energy that's being produced, about 17 basis points. And with that small amount of global energy consumption, it's also generating very negligible carbon emissions, about 11 basis points, or 11% of 1%. The hash rate this year is up about 45% year over year, while the energy has only increased about 25% year over year due to an increase in efficiency of 16% from new miner models being introduced and being deployed across the globe. The Bitcoin industry really is truly leading the rest of the world as the industry leader in sustainability, with a 58.9% estimated sustainable energy mix across the entire industry. This is something that is unparalleled across any other industry on the planet. Next slide. Here we just have a quick presentation overview and summary. We'll go ahead and get into more detail on all the individual slides. So let's just go on to the next. To start off here on the Bitcoin mining energy use versus total global energy use, we can see here that the Bitcoin mining energy use has increased a little bit. We're about 275 terawatt hours, but this is in context of the globe producing 165 or 317 terawatt hours. So really, you can see that Bitcoin mining comes out there as a very, very small and insignificant amount of the total energy utilized worldwide at about 17 basis points, or 17% of 1%. And the reason for this really is that the industry is still very small and very new, and it's becoming dramatically more energy efficient every year. So despite the fact that we are growing rapidly in network hash rate, we are seeing such tremendous improvements on the hardware side that the efficiency is off taking a lot of that additional growth. Next slide. When we take a look at the Bitcoin mining carbon emissions versus the total global carbon emissions, what we see here is a very similar picture to the energy side. This makes a lot of sense because the emissions are directly correlated, with energy usage. And what we see here is that because Bitcoin Mining Council members and the industry overall is using such a large amount of sustainable energy, that our global energy emissions as an industry are actually quite a bit smaller than our global energy usage as an industry, from 17 basis points to about 11 basis points. That's showing just how dramatically incentivized the industry is to utilize these renewable resources, and is a big driving force between this low amount of Bitcoin mining emissions. I think the biggest thing here to understand is that with 10 or 11 basis points of the world's total emission outputs, it makes Bitcoin mining a very inconsequential target if your primary goal is to reduce emissions. If your goal is to reduce emissions, this is basically a rounding error and will make no meaningful impact on climate change or any sort of environmental impact rolling forward. However, it does remove the only natural incentive throughout the entire world for private producers to reduce emissions without a government subsidy. And so in addition to it being a very, very small target, you're actually removing one of the best incentives and probably the only incentive outside of government subsidies to reduce your emissions as a private producer. In that way, Bitcoin mining is probably one of the more leading edge players and technologies when it comes to reducing emissions. Next slide. When we look at our energy use, we can break it down to not just as a global perspective, but also in comparison with other countries. This is something that we've seen repeatedly in news articles where Bitcoin mining is compared with relatively small countries and small levels of energy usage and consumption. But what we see here when we look at the chart, comparing it to the primary energy consumers of the world, really, countries like China and the United States are the largest producers and consumers of energy. And really the chart goes in an exponential scale downwards. As we continue moving down this chart, these numbers would drop off considerably further until we finally hit that 275 global Bitcoin mining. The reality here is that this is just an inconsequential amount of energy usage. Next slide. In addition to being an inconsequential amount of energy usage, we're also using a high amount of sustainable energy. Here we have a chart that shows both the Bitcoin Mining Council member data as well as the extrapolations for the entire global Bitcoin mining industry as a whole. And they stand at 63.8% for the Bitcoin Mining Council members and 58.8% for the entire industry here. When we compare that across these different countries from Germany to EU, South Korea, we can see that Bitcoin mining is really outpacing most of these countries in terms of their sustainable energy mix and utilizing these sustainable power resources. And the reason for that is because Bitcoin mining is very location agnostic and is very flexible load. It's also highly incentivized to seek out the most overlooked and underutilized sources of electricity and energy in order to remove and reduce cost. So we are incentivized as industry players to go after these remote energy sources and these sustainable energy sources that simply can't power a lot of the energy consumption that takes place in a place like Germany or South Korea in large metropolitan areas. Next slide. Here we're consuming or comparing global Bitcoin mining versus other industries around the world. And again, what we see here is that Bitcoin mining is really an inconsequential target. The reality is that Bitcoin mining emissions or consumption of energy is primarily closest to things like computer games and holiday lights. These are two things that you really don't hear people talking about as overwhelming threats to the planet, as things that are areas of concern, yet their energy consumption is very similar. 275 to 214 terawatt hours between Bitcoin mining and computer games. Again, reminding people that if we are going to be going after, industries, this is a very inconsequential one. If you have a 1% improvement in energy efficiency amongst this residential buildings category, it will more than offset the entire energy consumption for the entire global Bitcoin mining industry as a whole. And so residential buildings are going to be a much more impactful target, followed by road vehicles, non-residential building, and other forms of travel. Next slide. When we're looking at the quarterly data, the mining efficiency has continued to increase with the deployment of new gen miners and high efficiency miners that started trickling out in Q3 and really started hitting kind of full deployment in Q4. So what we've seen here is that the entire industry's electricity consumption is estimated to go up about 3% to about 11 gigawatts continuously, while the hash rate has grown a full 6% quarter over quarter from 231 to 245. This hash rate increase is due to both increases in energy consumption about 3%, but also that 3% improvement in mining efficiencies that we've seen from the new gen miners like the Bitmain XPs, the hydro miners from both Bitmain and MicroBT, the MicroBT M50S, as well as the new Intel miners that are starting to hit different players in the industry. So we've also seen a rather flat line there across the sustainable electricity quarter over quarter, where the sustainable electricity mix across the entire industry has stayed relatively consistent there in the high 50s percentage points, quarter over quarter for the last 7 quarters. And the Bitcoin Mining Council is outpacing the rest of that industry, again, by a few percentage points, leading to their higher efficiency machines. Next slide. Year over year, we're seeing other similar trends that we expect to continue. The mining efficiency has increased 16% year over year, primarily due to those new miners hitting the market, while the hash rate's up 45%. Another way to think about the hash rate really is the global security that it provides the Bitcoin network. Generally speaking, the larger the hash rate and the more decentralized the hash rate, the more secure Bitcoin is over time. So seeing this number continuously trend up, despite the macro headwinds that we've had over the past 6 months, is a very positive indicator that the industry is continuing to plow forward, invest in new plant, property, and equipment, and continue to secure the network in anticipation of stronger market conditions in the future. We now represent almost half of this global hash rate, which is a big increase that we've seen since we started this survey back in 2021. And the sustainable electricity mix there has basically, like I said, is more or less stable there, but has moved up marginally year over year from about 58.5% to 58.9% sustainable electricity. Next. This efficiency improvement really has all to do with this page here with regards to the mining hardware. And what we've seen here is really the evolution of mining hardware over the last 12, 13 years, really starting with the basic CPUs, GPUs, and dramatically increasing starting in the teens from 2013 or so, the introduction of ASIC machines that dramatically improved the efficiency of this equipment. Even on a year-by-year basis, we're still seeing dramatic improvements in efficiency, where last year, the best units that you could buy in terms of energy efficiency were S19 Pros or J Pros at about 29.5 joules per terahash, which is now 21.5 joules per terahash at the end of 2022. This is showing that even on a 12-month basis, we can have, roughly a 30% improvement in efficiency between the best miner at the time to the next best miner at the time, a dramatic improvement in energy efficiency. And this is what's driving the industry forward in order to reduce our energy consumption while providing higher and higher levels of security. This joule per terahash efficiency over time has gone up about 5,800% from the beginning of the ASICs about 8 years ago. So right now we're assuming that the global joules per terahash efficiency is about 46 watt per terahash, which puts it just below the newest gen miners here at 21.5 joules per terahash, and puts it right about in line with an S17 or an M30S or an M31S in terms of energy efficiency, recognizing that not everybody is running these newest generation XPs, and these are still continuing to hit the markets. Next slide. In conclusion here, really the Bitcoin mining energy efficiency is improving just tremendously fast. We're estimating as a council somewhere between a 3 and 2 times improvement in mining efficiency over the next couple of years. And following that, about a 6-fold improvement over the following 4 years after that. When you combine that with the fact that there is a halving built into the Satoshi protocol that reduces the energy consumption and reduces the incentive to consume electricity basically in half every 4 years. Really, the guaranteed or the combination of dramatically improvement in hardware as well as the reduction in energy through the economic incentive of the halving means that Bitcoin mining is guaranteed to be dramatically more energy efficient in the next 8 years and basically every year rolling forward. This is not a trend that is ever expected to change. Next slide. The curtailment. This is probably the most interesting part of the Q4 report for me. The curtailment in Q4 has really ticked up quite considerably. We had 14 different Bitcoin Mining Council members reporting their participation in curtailment programs around the world. In Q4 alone, there was reported to be 1,280 gigawatt hours curtailed across the globe by these 14 different BMC members. Cumulatively, they have had about 2.5 gigawatts enrolled in these curtailment programs. And really the blind share of this is taking place in the United States and Canada, where that represents about 2.1 gigawatts in curtailment programs operating in the United States and Canada amongst these BMC members. These are, only about 50% of the network is reporting in our BMC member survey data. So these numbers can be seen as somewhat conservative. There's likely going to be other members or other miners participating in curtailment programs that are not reported in these figures here. When you look at that 2.1 gigawatts in curtailment, really what we need to find is a direct comparison. And the best comparison in our mind is utility battery storage. Between the United States and Canada, there is 8.3 gigawatts worth of utility battery storage installed at the end of 2022. So that means when you look at the gigawatts in curtailment programs, 2.1 relative to the 8.3, the grid has been given or has a tool in their belt there that enables them to basically grow the effective utility battery storage by about 25%. Because in addition to that utility battery storage of 8.3 gigawatts, we have the 2.1 worth of interruptible load or demand response from Bitcoin miners, which brings that number from 8.3 down to 10.4 in terms of total gigawatts available to the grid in these kind of peak demand scenarios. This is a very, very meaningful number because the batteries are very expensive to be building out. It costs a lot of money for the utilities to be investing in this technology, and they're getting the same benefits without any of the capital cost through these Bitcoin miners participating in this curtailment. And so by providing a framework through which to curtail, really they've created a fantastic incentive for private producers to come in here and participate and provide the capital investment, property, plant, and equipment in order to provide the same functionality as utility battery storage, but at a fraction of the cost. So this is a really, really interesting trend here. I think this is one of the more powerful trends with Bitcoin mining right now and moving forward. And one of the most interesting aspects of this is that this is something that is really unique to the Bitcoin mining industry. Traditional data centers that are operating continuous 100% uptime do not have the ability to curtail. If you can't post on your social network or send your email, there's going to be all sorts of problems. But because of the way the Bitcoin network was designed to be anti-fragile, it is really creating the economic incentive to join in these curtailment programs and participate. And just by turning off our load and returning that to the grid, we really are changing the economic dynamics and situation between energy utilities and energy customers around the world. And the United States and Canada is really leading the way on that front. Next, I think that's the last slide. This just goes over our sources and methodology for anybody who's interested. This goes over our questions that we ask on the survey and all of our different sources that we use for anybody to review and look into further if they're interested. And with that, we'll go to the next slide and launch into Q&A. We'll bring Sharish back up.
Thank you, Ben and Michael. As an introduction, I am Shirish Jajodia. I'm the Vice President of Treasury and Investor Relations at MicroStrategy. I will be your moderator today to help navigate through the Q&As. With that, we'll jump right into questions. First question is, what are the implications of the FTX failure on Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining?
I'll start. I think that the FTX failure has actually been a catalytic event, and it's been good for Bitcoin. I think it's really highlighted the strengths of proof of work, highlighted the strengths of a network based upon Bitcoin mining that's a commodity. I think there's been a lot of confusion about the difference between proof of stake and proof of work. And tokens like FTT token were based on staking algorithms and the like, and they weren't backed by energy. So the FTX failure has been a very visible educational event that's educated an entire generation of lawmakers, policymakers, journalists, and investors as to why Bitcoin is different than FTT token or Terra or Luna or Serum or these other air tokens. And it also really underscored the benefits of an asset you could take self-custody of without counterparty risk. So although it's been painful for the industry, I think it's actually catalyzed a lot of positive developments, both in the education of investors as well as in the DC regulatory environment, and generally what I've seen throughout all of the coverage is a growing appreciation for the benefits of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining through this kind of debacle.
Just maybe add a quick comment onto that, Michael. I think you summed it up well. I think the biggest implication, at least for this industry and Bitcoin mining in particular, obviously the price has an impact, but I think the bigger thing here is understanding counterparty risk and making people in the industry, especially new people to this industry, aware of counterparty risk. This is something that has been an issue in the industry since its inception and has made tremendous strides forward, especially with the amounts of public companies and audited reports and everything else that's been going on over the last couple of years. But counterparty risk persists and will continue to persist. And, it's up to everybody to do their due diligence and learn about how to best participate in this industry and not take everybody's word at, first glance.
It's a chance to remind everybody that Bitcoin mining is the price you pay in order to eliminate that counterparty risk that you otherwise have to take on. Taras?
Now, one other point to mention is that unfortunately FTX was not a source of good for Bitcoin generally in DC. And the fact that they've fallen so far from grace and are no longer funding the anti-Bitcoin movement in Washington, I think the entire Bitcoin network will benefit from that. So that's at least a silver lining to the events that have transpired with FTX. And unfortunately, the hundreds of thousands of clients who've been either wiped out or lost a material sum because of it.
Thank you.
Shirish?
We'll move on to the next question. Next question is, in the current macro environment, how do you see consolidation evolving for public miners? Do you expect it to come via M&A of entire companies or through parts of companies, that is, separate purchases of mining rigs and infrastructure?
Ooh, who wants to take the first crack at that one?
I think it's you, Taras.
Yeah, I think that the sector is ripe for consolidation. There's a lot of assets that need to be cleaned up because of poor risk management practices that have occurred. And so I would argue that over the next 6 months, you will certainly see M&A, some additional liquidations and auctions of assets that have been distressed. There's many names that most of the panelists here can speak to that are already in Chapter 11. My former employer, Celsius and BlockFi. But regardless, I think that most of the pain in regards to the over leveraging is likely behind us on the miner side. And now we're really looking to start with a stronger base going into the next run as we continue to grow the network itself.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. Bitcoin mining is a completely free industry. And in a free market like this, we should expect to see all sorts of different scenarios playing out, from whole company acquisitions to piecemeal picking of parts and stuff like that from different counterparties. We've seen a lot already happen, but as Taras said, I think the next 6 months we're going to continue to see this unwind further. I think that's a very positive thing for this industry. We had a very, very easy capital market for a long period of time, which I think led to a period of malinvestment, which is being unwound now. And that is a key part of setting up a strong foundation for the next run.
Yeah, one other point I wanted to make is that some of the market leaders like Riot, Marathon, they have been actively delevering, and they're sitting on a ton of dry powder. And so generally when the market starts swinging up and you've got large incumbents with dry powder on their books, you'll start seeing M&A of good teams or great assets. And so I would not be surprised if we start seeing some headlines over the next couple of quarters around that theme.
Next question. What is the significance of Intel shipping Bitcoin mining equipment?
I'll start. I think it's important to note that the security of the Bitcoin network, it comes not just from the operation of Bitcoin mining data centers, but it also comes from the shipment and upgrading of Bitcoin mining equipment and semiconductors. And so you've had a couple of companies that have dominated the industry. And you've got Bitmine, you've got WhatsMiner, but to have Intel enter with a lot of capital and a lot of commitment, I think is a good thing. It creates a strong North American-based semiconductor manufacturer that is committed to Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. I think it'll be good politically for Bitcoin in North America to have Intel behind it. I think it'll be good for Bitcoin miners to have another strong vendor to choose from that'll create more competition at the equipment layer. And I think it creates more resilience in the Bitcoin network, because you never want to be dependent upon just a small number of equipment manufacturers. So the more you have and the more diversified, then the more decentralized the network is. So I see this as it's a welcome improvement of decentralization and resilience, while at the same time it undermines narratives that the equipment is sourced out of China, and ultimately what you really want is you want a strong Chinese equipment manufacturer to encourage everybody in the China sphere of influence to trust Bitcoin. And you like a strong North American equipment manufacturer to encourage everyone in the Western world to trust Bitcoin. And it's always good to have choices for negotiation if you have to buy the equipment. So I think the result of that is great for the network. And then the last point is it will accelerate the improvement in network efficiency, both the energy efficiency. It'll drive us down the joules per terahash curve faster with another aggressive investor and equipment manufacturer. And I think it also helps us build a mechanical advantage of ASIC technology versus general purpose CPU technologies. And as the ASIC technology advances, that creates a mechanical advantage for Bitcoin security. And ultimately, that's very auspicious for the entire network and the asset class. Anybody else want to add anything?
Hi, Michael. Yeah, I could offer a few thoughts. So my name is Kulyk. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of Hive Blockchain. So we just launched the Hive Bus Miner, which uses the Intel Blockscale chip. Can everyone hear me, by the way?
Yeah, we hear you great.
Okay, great. So Intel reached out in late 2021, and they sort of courted us through a series of technical diligence. Myself and my CTO had a series of calls, and then we were informed that we would be one of the companies that they were going to collaborate with. So I actually started my career as an engineer in microelectronics. And so it was sort of a dream come true in that regard. building on all the comments that Michael just elaborated on, to partner with a Fortune 500 company and leverage all the immense engineering resources they had. We got to work directly with the ASIC team. We had guys from their thermodynamics team come to our facility in Sweden. They have power engineers, hardware engineers. The firmware is basically open source to us, right? So we did a press release last week announcing the performances in the 110 to 130 terahash range. And so what's nice is that's actually a dynamic operating frequency range. So we have the ability to either go for more hash rate or more efficiency. And we're not doing that. We're not coloring outside the line. So we're not having to install Vanish and, pay a third party by doing a firmware hack to overclock an S19. We're not having to install third-party control boards. It's a product with an intended operating range. And how that came about actually was because Intel was so collaborative, right? Like we explained hash rate economics and we're like, look, you want to get the lowest dollar per terahash as possible, right? And in a bull market, by the way, more hash rate's more important than more efficiency. Obviously, in a bear market, the efficiency is more important. And so they listened, right? And to overclock their hardware, right? You can, right? And as soon as you do, you avoid the warranty because they want you to buy more of their machines. And so Intel's a different type of company, right? Just the nature of the supply agreement was very different. So it's been very exciting, and it also adds a layer of intellectual capital too, because I think all of our companies, employ very intelligent, great people, and so for sure, like Bitmain and MicroBT have very sophisticated engineers and staff and so forth, and they sort of mastered their product, but it really gives a chance to North American and other global Bitcoin miners if they start implementing their own system design, which is what we did at Hive, right? So it's actually the Hive Buzz Miner powered by the Intel block scale, because we made a lot of improvements in the thermodynamics firmware. There's obviously technical guys on this call, so I'll speak geek for a second. We were able to develop bespoke API calls and get a level of granularity to manage our fleet of buzz miners you just wouldn't be able to do with other machines. And so I think that's the next way forward. You're not just having to rely on CG Miner. There's other software clients, and so it's really cool the level of visibility that we can see, and we're learning. Like we've deployed 2,000 of these in the field. We've got another 900 being installed this week. Like we'll be at 5,800 of these things hashing by the end of this month. And we've got some in Sweden, some in New Brunswick. And so just as the product lifecycle evolves, we'll be able to provide feedback to Intel and evolve our own product design. So that's what's really exciting. And ultimately, look, we also announced that we bought some S19s for a great price. But it's about having stability in your supply chain, especially in a bull market. Because that's where things get dicey for people when they're chasing hash rate. And so having more stability in our supply chain, being able to have an edge in the design, even mechanical improvements, like there's so much room once it's an open source product. So it's very exciting, and we're super glad that Intel stuck with it. And all of us on this call, we're obviously long on the sector, and it's been a tough year, but I think that showing that there's committed companies that don't just like give up and forge through, and actually credit Intel too, because some of their executives and senior engineers are very passionate about Bitcoin, and that's where we all are today, right? So I think Intel's here to stay in the sector, and certainly we're excited to evolve the product and kind of share more with the industry as time goes on.
Yeah, it's exciting to see teams like Hive really pick up the puck, using a Canadian turn of phrase, on this sector. Other teams like Epic Technologies out of Toronto and Global Foundries in the US, I think really shows the trend that North America, it's not just going to be the home of mining, but hopefully the new home of silicon technology. Historically, it has been China, Beijing, Taiwan, Samsung out of South Korea. And now we have a lot of onshoring, as you mentioned before, Aiden, that I think is the beginning of a very strong trend to show that we do have the capacity right here in North America to build high quality semiconductor technology. So it's really a great thing to see.
Maybe just one quick comment on that. In the same way that Bitcoin mining can function as an industrial tenant and a primary tenant for the creation of new energy generation facilities, renewable or otherwise, Bitcoin mining is also operating at the leading edge of silicon and chip design, where some of the more traditional players who have very big product life cycles, they've got marketing, they've got to find customers and everything else. They simply can't innovate on the newest technologies and process nodes that Samsung and TSMC are designing and implementing, and Bitcoin mining can. And so in addition to, providing that kind of base load buying power from generating sites, it's also providing kind of that base load purchasing capacity from the brand new process nodes that TSMC, Samsung, and everybody else are introducing, which is helping to accelerate the computing trend forward.
Thanks, everyone. Next question is to discuss the current trends in hash price, network hash rate, and rig pricing.
I'll jump in here. Network hash rate has continued to increase basically every quarter unrelentlessly. What this means in combination with lower Bitcoin price is a lower hash rate price. So we are looking at we're at all-time lows historically for USD revenue per terahash, irregardless of what calculation you're looking at, FPPS, PPS, PPLNS, whatever it may be, we're at historic lows. Even with the price increase that we've seen over the last couple of days, we've also seen a large difficulty adjustment upward, which has offset a lot of those improvement in economics. And so really, I think what we're looking at here is a function of economics here that's impacting the rig pricing, right? The rigs are just a present value function of how much Bitcoin they're expected to generate over an X period of time. And so with these low levels of hash rate price, we're seeing the lowest levels of rig pricing we've seen in a considerable amount of time. What this does mean is that when the network does begin to shift and when macro conditions do begin to shift, as Taras pointed out, with all that dry powder, all this low cost equipment out there on the market, there's going to be some significant potential for companies to upgrade their equipment, expand their operations, and do so at a cost which 12 months ago, 15 months ago would have been, unimaginable. So that's really leading us into the next the next bull market. I think these low levels of prices is always the time when you want to buy in and invest in new mining equipment. And I think that's what we're starting to see now and rolling forward on the next couple of quarters.
Thank you. Next question. How competitive are the public miners on the cost curve, that is cost per terahash per second, versus the other 75 to 80% of network hash rate that we have little knowledge of?
I could actually address that. So we saw difficulty adjust in December downwards for the first time in a long time. And so just looking at the dollar per kilowatt hour revenue curve for ASICs going from, call it 30 joules a terahash down to 50 joules a terahash, I noticed that the 50 joule per terahash machines were nearing the sub 5 cent per kilowatt hour revenue. And back in 2019, 2020, when everyone was using S9s, it was readily apparent that the global revenue floor was about 3.5, 4 cents a kilowatt hour. And, things would sort of like stagnate around there and eventually things pick back up. So I think as the network has grown and there's more gigawatts globally, there's only so much, 2, 3, and 4 cent power. So now the bigger network, I think that layer of the onion that starts to get shaved off first is around 5 cents of OpEx if you're using older gear. So I think that when we saw difficulty drop by about 9% in December, that was reflective. Now, was everybody, running 50 joule per terahash machines at 5 cents, or did they have more efficient machines but their cost of operation was 7 or 8 cents? I don't know, but it's an interesting study because now there's this huge spectrum of efficiency.
I think when it comes to the public miners, just like every other industry, you've got a wide variety of different counterparties out there with different specs going on in their business. If you're looking at your direct mining margin cost, it's primarily a function of electricity price and energy efficiency on the equipment. That directly leads to a cost to operate the equipment, or a COGS per terahash. And that basically becomes the question. If that COGS per terahash is greater than the revenue per terahash, obviously you're going to want to shut down. What we've seen in the public mining sphere is a variety of situations. Companies with consistently low costs. We've seen companies with costs going up considerably. We've seen companies who are surviving well, and we've seen companies who've gone Chapter 11. So, I think the public mining industry is really representative of the whole industry overall. And I don't think they're necessarily faring much better or much worse than the private sector.
Thank you. Next question is, discuss the current trends in energy pricing and how it is impacting the industry.
Well, that's a great question. Given that 80 to 90% of OpEx for digital mining is power related, macro energy trends obviously have a huge impact on digital mining in North America and globally. Luckily, we're seeing a warm winter in Europe, and unfortunately, the Russian invasion and war is continuing, but the pressure on energy markets is massively subsided because of the warm weather. In addition, you've got all of the LNG ships waiting on the outside of Europe to plug into the infrastructure to distribute the gas, meaning there's a massive oversupply. And the same thing is happening here in North America. And so we're looking to see over the next 2 quarters, natural gas, which is a major driver and input into electrical generation in North America, continue to drop to historical norms. And so luckily, we'll see most of the power increases that have occurred over the last, call it 3-4 quarters, subside materially. There were some public companies in the news prior where they were forced to restructure their contracts with our hosting clients because of power pricing. And luckily, that trend is now going the opposite, and we're going to see major reductions in costs for power inputs. And so that will naturally help a lot of the struggling miners who are on variable rate PPAs with their utilities or their power providers if they are behind the meter. So we're getting a lot of pressure released from where we were up against the wall on costs because of the energy trends that are occurring right now.
Next question. How is the relationship between Bitcoin mining and energy production evolving over the past year?
I can take that one again, unless Mike, you want to jump in?
You go ahead.
Well, it's a match made in heaven. I mean, I've been saying for a few years now that, again, given 80 to 90% of our inputs are power related, that the power sector will really become a much bigger and bigger player in digital mining. And we're just seeing that play out. I mean, you've seen ExxonMobil, major other energy producers globally, the Ministry of Energy in Japan, looking at Bitcoin mining as a grid stabilization mechanism. It's not a battery. In fact, it's the opposite of a battery. Bitcoin mining and digital mining allows energy generators as well as grids to overbuild supply, meaning the marginal cost of production drops for the consumer. And when they need the power, we're not a smelter. We're not a major manufacturer. We can turn off when the grids need us to, allowing the power to go to the consumers, and over time, massively drop the price that the ratepayers do actually see on their bill. And so luckily, some of the folks in Washington, D.C., as well as up here north of the wall in Canada, are starting to really appreciate that. Bitcoin mining is net positive for the grid because we do allow for overcapacity, which alleviates pressure for everybody else.
I will just add to that that in the last 24 months, all of the events around the crypto industry and the Bitcoin mining industry have brought Bitcoin to the forefront of the energy industry. And so there might have been people in the industry that didn't really know about Bitcoin or understand it in 2019 or 2020. And in 2021, they started to hear about it. But 2022 was kind of a coming out party. And now it's much more common to speak to executives in the energy industry and have them thinking about Bitcoin and taking it very seriously across you've got nuclear, you've got it's a solution for nuclear, a solution for natural gas, a solution for stranded energy sources everywhere in the world, a solution for stranded hydro. You're reading stories in the Tech Review about stranded hydro plants in the Congo where it's being used. There really isn't a day when you don't read a story about some energy provider that was struggling with the problem. And I think in the height of the bull market, Bitcoin mining equipment was getting very expensive, and they might have been a bit afraid. But now the equipment it's much less expensive. There's more equipment on the market. You've got a whole set of industry restructuring dynamics where people are out actually knocking on doors and talking to the energy companies who are extremely well capitalized yet conservative. So this is exactly the time when they start to look at this and think, this is about the right thing for us. We can buy the equipment much cheaper than it would have cost us a year or 2 years ago. There's an easy partner. There's a lot of companies that want to partner with us. We've got a problem, and we've got lots and lots of examples of success stories. So I think that Bitcoin is becoming increasingly intertwined with the energy industry, and it's pretty clear that it's synergistic. If you're a Bitcoin miner, you kind of have to have a good strategic relationship with your energy provider. I think that's been made abundantly clear in the past, 12 months. But if you're an energy company, you can't help but notice there's this, clean, high baseload user of energy that can operate intermittently anywhere in the world. So this story of Bitcoin and energy is just getting better and better and getting stronger. And if anything, it's hard to see if you're an energy provider how you can get to world-class efficiency and economics if you don't have Bitcoin as part of your grid mix at somewhere in the grid.
Thanks, Michael and Taras. Next question is, what is the current desire amongst companies not currently involved in Bitcoin mining, that is energy companies, data center companies, etc., to become Bitcoin mining operators?
I think that's an interesting question. We have seen a constant changing of the guard in the Bitcoin mining industry since it was founded, back in 2009, and the industry really took shape back in 2013, with full-fledged facilities and dedicated hardware. The reality of this space with a completely free market is that there is going to be a constant changing of the guard, and that constant changing of the guard is a good thing that helps to keep the network more secure because no individual players are accumulating too much power over time. What I think as a next part of that phase is going to be more non-traditional players coming into the space and learning how they can optimize their existing operations and make use out of things that were normally kind of wasted resources and recycle them through Bitcoin mining. I don't think that most of these new entrants are looking at, converting over to being a completely Bitcoin mining company. I don't think that's the strategy, or I don't think they're properly incentivized to do so, but they are highly incentivized to look at way of optimizing their current operations and minimizing their waste and recycling their inputs with some sort of integration of Bitcoin mining. And that's taking place with data centers, it's taking place with energy companies, it's taking place with agricultural companies, it's taking place across all sorts of different varieties where people are realizing that these kind of tail ends of energy, which are normally not applicable to most use cases can now be addressed with Bitcoin mining. And so I think that's something that is continuing to trend upward. And the lower price of Bitcoin mining hardware that we have right now is really enabling a whole new wave of prototyping, researching, development, testing of these different ways to implement Bitcoin mining within existing operations, which is a very, very bullish thing in the long term.
Thanks, Ben. Next question. Efficiency improved year over year by 16%. Do you expect this trend to continue? And what are the implications of this dynamic?
Yeah, I'll start. I think if we're back to Moore's law again, it's just important for people to remember that proof of work is a security protocol based upon two inputs: raw energy or electricity, and then also semiconductor hardware hashing capacity. And what's happening is that the hashing capacity, the ASIC efficiency keeps improving. And it's, as Ben pointed out, it's improved by 5,800% over 8 years. It seems to be marching up at 15% a year, somewhere between 15 and 20% a year. It might slow down or go faster from time to time, but when you're running at that level and you start to think about the exponential impact, what you can see is that we're in the middle period, I think, of Bitcoin mining. I think the early years, like the first few years, it was very energy intensive. Back when you saw those non-ASICs, when you didn't have ASICs using CPUs and GPUs, it was on the margin more energy intensive and used raw power. And we're in the middle years where it's kind of half energy. The story is half energy, and the other story is half technology. And then if you roll the clock out more than 20 years from now, if you go out 30 years, between 30 years and 60 years, there'll be a point at which the network is secured more by the special purpose technology. And to be dominant in Bitcoin mining, it's going to be a capital intensive, technology intensive exercise. And your ability to get energy is going to become less important. Now, mind you, not in the next decade, but the implications is the network morphs from energy intensive to technology intensive. And a simple analogy would be, if you look at the agriculture industry, when people they didn't have tractors and internal combustion engines, everything was labor intensive, and you had an army of people farming. And then machines came along, and eventually, if you're a farmer, you better have a tractor, because it doesn't matter if you have 10,000 people. What matters is if you have the equipment to manufacture the food. So I think, Bitcoin's right in that middle period where energy matters and technology matters. And now there's a little bit of a race, and the question is how much faster will the technology evolve? And with the entrance of Intel, it kind of suggests the technology is going to evolve faster than it would have otherwise evolved. And eventually Bitcoin mining is a technology industry, and Bitcoin is secured by technology. And that's really good, because what that means is that over time, the security cost of the network is going to fall with the improvement in technology. And that's important. When you get to $100 trillion on the Bitcoin network, you don't want to have 20% of it staked, like in a proof of stake network. What you want to have is billions of dollars of special purpose equipment that secures all of the monetary assets, and it secures it 1 million times more efficiently than general purpose equipment. And that's what's going on right now with ASIC semiconductor technology advances. And ultimately, it's a good thing for Bitcoin. It's a good thing for Bitcoin miners. It's a good thing for anyone that's going to be a technology leader in the space, like Hive, that's embracing, Intel and variable clock rate machinery. This is the future of the industry. Once upon a time, it's a question of how hard could you work and how cheap was your labor. But clearly, that's not an industry you want to be in long term if you're smart.
Just to elaborate on Michael's comments, which I think were extremely well summarized. is technology as a resource, because as we've seen now that we're in the multi-exahash scale, managing fleets of 10, 20, 30,000 miners, it becomes its own challenge. And you see divergence in Bitcoin per exahash figures. And so I think as miners advance their own software control systems and their own protocols at their data centers, because when you deploy all this capital and you're managing energy as a resource as well, you don't want to have just gaps where you've got machines that are offline or frozen or just not hashing when they should be. And so it's not something that is often talked about when we're talking to the retail sector. But amongst us industry peers and experts, I'm sure everyone can empathize that we all kind of have these internal optimizations that we try to make just to get as much uptime as possible. And as I'm sure we all have unique dashboards at our different data centers that our coding teams have developed, and that's really fun and exciting. We just updated our software stack as well, because we're aware that we're all going to be scaling. And so I really think it's well spoken, Michael, that technology is a resource that we're all implementing. So that makes it exciting, and it's good for the industry.
Just one quick comment on that. I think definitely the efficiency improvements that we're talking about here and the technology is definitely going to continue year over year. There's been no sign of that changing. I don't see any sign of that changing rolling forward, despite Moore's law. We seem to be powering through with developing new technologies, and Bitcoin mining, again, is at the forefront of those technologies. What I do really expect, though, that is going to happen with this trend and some of the implications with this is that the hardware lifespan is also going to be extended dramatically as well. The reality of the industry that we have and the reality of curtailment programs is that, in addition to, seeking high uptime rates and high online rates, there is a cost associated, an opportunity cost associated with being offline. And so in a lot of situations where non-traditional Bitcoin mining companies want to integrate Bitcoin mining in their business to address kind of excess resources or waste or heat inputs and everything else, lower efficiency and lower CapEx might actually be a preferred strategy for them, because it enables them to use more of those resources for a lower initial cost. And it also reduces the opportunity cost from not being online. And so if you're looking at situations where curtailment is the majority, as opposed to the minority of your time, then these kind of lower efficiency machines have a second life and can be extended out, for years beyond their useful lifespan currently. So there's two things that are happening here simultaneously. It's like the new gen is continuously leading in efficiency improvements, but the way that we're utilizing this hardware is becoming really innovative and really creative, and that's going to really extend their useful lifespan.
Yeah, just to add to that, there's been some really interesting stories coming out of Africa, where their cost of power production is fractions of a penny because of the scale of infrastructure that was built by international FDI that came in and then was never consumed. Bitcoin mining is literally saving national parks in Africa, which is pretty insane when you think about it. But these kind of uses of stranded energy that was overbuilt but is now being finally monetized is exactly what we want to see. And Ben, you nailed it with that reference.
Thank you. Next question. With elevated energy prices and a potentially low hash price carried out into 2023, how we may see miners adjust their treasury strategy?
Oh, anybody want to take this, or can I take this one? Yeah, the treasury strategy, I think we're seeing the results with many of the Chapter 11 filings with some of the folks out there, unfortunately. Risk management will certainly become top of mind. People will remember that this is a highly cyclical industry, and when the going is good, they need to really preserve and build up that nest egg versus go all out, full stop. So a neutral treasury management strategy is likely to be seen with a lot of the folks out there. And again, as I mentioned earlier, some of the larger, more sophisticated players are deleveraging and really maintaining a neutral treasury management strategy where, yes, they're still maintaining and building BTC on their balance sheet, which is fantastic, but they're paying their bills and making sure that they're not over levered. And so in addition to the consolidation and the scale that we should be seeing through the M&A, balanced and neutral treasury management, I think, is something that we should be seeing. But I'll let Ben and Aidan and Frank, outgoing CEO and soon to be chairman of Hive, touch on that discussion point.
Pardon me?
Oh, sorry, Taras.
I couldn't hear.
I was just saying, I was going to hand the microphone to you guys and Ben about how public miners look at treasury management and risk management going forward, given how we've seen some of the folks who didn't think of it too much. So if you guys wanted to touch on that topic.
Well, it's always been part of our strategy, and I think that we're fortunate with all the software strategic partnerships we have. We were able to pivot from being paid a standby fee in Sweden, and all of a sudden, as energy soared there, that we had an algorithm that allowed us to go back to the utility and sell back to them. And so it saves them 500,000, but it added 3 some odd million to us. But it's now what we've discovered is that you have to, if you're in the northern climate, is you need to have machinery that you have to close, like all the louvers. And so when we've been trying to do this in Canada, the first time was people running around trying to close all the louvers so that we could turn around and take from 37 megawatts down to 3, but so that it doesn't get too cold, to sell that energy back. And so what we recognize is that you really have to have great software coders. You have to have spending money all the time on them, and that they have to. Then we have to spend $100,000 on small little motors. They're going to be tied to that software. That all of a sudden energy's peaking, the louvers are closing, and we send the signals. We're giving back this energy, and it works that way. So that's the biggest thing is we're all evolving with it, but it's having a strategy of hedging, which I know from the fund business we've been doing them, and for currencies. So now it's evolved. Now, not every jurisdiction has a sophisticated hedging mechanism. In Canada, it's nothing like in Sweden, and in the US, it's another far better level. But one of the things that concerned us, we saw, was the hedging where we could hedge like this in Sweden, 30 megawatts, all of a sudden was 1. It was 3. So we immediately adjusted and adapted and started saying, okay, it's down to 2.5 cents, hit the 1. The next day it's 3 cents, hit 1, hit 3 megawatts. So we built it up, and then we scaled it out for 1 month, 3 months, 1 year. And we're just looking at data and collecting and putting it together. But you need to have good software. If that helps you in understanding what we're doing, besides the strategy. And then, but thank you. One of all, I want to thank Michael for the shout out on Intel Inside the Heart. It was great because everyone who's sending me information. It was great, and I'm so happy that Aiden, after 18 months, he's been baptized in fire with a big down cycle now, and he's taking over the CEO role, and I can sit back and play more of the strategist of what we're doing. But Aiden's done a great job, and if you want technical things like that, he's the best guy to talk to.
Thanks, guys.
I'll just wrap up on that treasury comment. I think Michael nailed it when he said we're just kind of here in this middle phase with regards to Bitcoin mining as an industry. And I think people can forget, when we are such a large industry with so many publicly traded players, that this is an industry that's really only 13 years old. Actually, I think 14 now. As of a couple of weeks ago. this is something that, sophisticated hedging products really didn't even exist until there was already a demand for one, as the markets were changing. And so I think this, macro headwinds that we saw over the last 6 and 12 months really have emphasized the need for these derivative products, for hedging tools, for better treasury management. And it's really going to be a catalyst for public mining companies and private mining companies to step up their game and develop these more comprehensive strategies and systems so that they are, able to accommodate, lower market conditions or changing market conditions as they roll forward. And I think that's very bullish in the long term. It just shows how early we still are in this game, that these products are really just starting to be introduced and starting to be understood by the industry. And I think by the time the next bull market is out, and then the next bear market after that, companies are going to look very different with their treasury management and their hedging strategies by that time.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I think that brings us to the end of the Q&A session. We are at the end of the time. So I would like to thank all the panelists for their detailed and thorough insights, Ben, Taurus, Aiden, Frank, and I would like to pass on to Michael for the closing remarks.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for being with us today. Hopefully, this was a useful briefing. I think clearly the data shows that the network is getting more secure. It's getting more efficient. It's further decentralizing, and Bitcoin soldiers on in good times and bad times. And we will look forward to speaking with you all again in 12 weeks. So thank you for your support, and have a great evening.